Chantel.
want to- oh. All right, there we go.
And you know that
Sorry,
Chantel, she's awful.
We need somebody to mute. Thank you. So I want to remind everybody that we are all neighbors here, and the folks we have are on the call with us today are hardworking public servants, and in the case of our planning board, they are all volunteer, and they have a hard job, and they are looking for positive solutions for our community. So they need our help, and there have been a lot of questions about conflict mitigation, and public meetings can be a hard place to have conversations. So we hope that this helps us address any questions you may have before the next public meeting, which is scheduled for October 21st. I wanted to share that yesterday I met with a longtime ranching family in our community, and I learned some wisdom. The patriarch of the family reminded me that we should realize every time we come together to talk about hard things, we have an opportunity to build social capital. That we may not agree, but we can show up and we can learn about one another. We've been working through hard things in this community for a long time, and we're going to continue to have hard conversations around planning. PCEC has a very diverse membership, and I know there are a lot of different ideas about planning and what we need to be working on right now. So I want to remind everyone to be kind and gracious as we work through these things in community, hoping that we will build social capital and stronger relationships regardless of the outcome, so that we can tackle whatever the next big thing that comes our way. So thank you everybody for muting your computer, and we'll continue to help with that if needed. Please put your questions in the chat as they arise, and we'll have plenty of time to go through them at the end of the presentations. And as always, our presentation is being recorded and we'll share it on our website. You can find all of those conversations in this one at pcecmt.org/community conversations. So I need to do a quick introduction about PCEC, and then we'll dive into conflict mitigation. So PCEC, we're your community conservation group. We've got 650 contributing members and about 2,500 supporters here in Park County. And we work with people to safeguard the land, water, wildlife, and communities in Yellowstone's Northern Gateway. We do that through grassroots organizing and advocacy. Park County is the traditional homeland and the current home to many indigenous people, including the Apsaloka or Crow tribe. Park County today has a long tradition of human habitation, of people who have loved, cherished, and stewarded this place. And we're committed to working together to honor that legacy and this place for future generations. I've been hosting these conversations about growth and planning in our community for a couple years now. Our goal is to help us all gain a shared understanding of some of the most pressing issues we face as a community, so we can be more knowledgeable and prepared to advocate for this place. There's a lot happening right now. We have been seeing more and more people retreating to gateway communities like ours to live near natural amenities like the Yellowstone River, Yellowstone National Park. We're seeing a boom in both recreation and residential development, and the trend has been happening for years. With the COVID pandemic, the increase in new residents has been quite remarkable. But we believe that by working together, we can build the vision for the community we want to become rather than let growth happen to us. Conflict mitigation is a tool that uses conditional use permits to mitigate impacts from industrial and commercial development. At PCEC, we are often the first ones to learn about new industrial threats, and we've worked with our community over the past 5 years to ward off gold mines, asphalt plants, gravel pits, tire dumps. And we're hopeful that conflict mitigation will provide a local tool to deal with these types of controversial developments. So with that introduction, I'm going to pass the microphone over to community planner Jen Magic to set the stage for conflict mitigation and to introduce our speakers. So thank you all for joining us today. Take it away, Jen.
Thanks, Michelle. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to have a conversation about conflict mitigation. I think one of our main goals is to learn. There is a lot to learn in planning. I've been in the field for quite some time and feel that I'm always learning. So we're here to listen and be respectful and hopefully kind of take a couple of nuggets away that we didn't know perhaps at the beginning of the meeting. So conflict mitigation, the regulation is essentially set up similar to a very common planning tool that is used throughout the country. It's used throughout Montana. I've worked in Montana as a land use planner for a dozen years, and it's used throughout the state, but also throughout the country. It establishes pretty much a simple permitting process for certain land uses, and a jurisdiction can kind of cleverly prepare a regulation that fits a particular jurisdiction. So Park County has the opportunity to prepare a conflict mitigation regulation that fits Park County. So I wanted to say that because I think in calling it conflict mitigation, there's potential for some confusion there, that this is something unique to Park County, something that the Park County Planning Department is proposing out of the blue. And that simply is not the case. So today we have a couple of Park County leaders joining us. We have Bill Berg, County Commissioner, John Heidke, who has been the chair of the planning board for a couple of years. And we have Mike Inman, who has been part of the Park County Planning Department for some time. And so we thought we'd start with them, just give them an opportunity to speak. And then really what we intend to do is open up kind of the bulk of the conversation to question, answer, and an informal, respectful discussion. So Bill Berg, I told you I would start with you. If you want to unmute yourself and just share a few words, that would be great.
You bet. Thanks so much for setting this up. Yeah, if you share a property line with a neighbor, you certainly have mutual interests. And if you share a valley or a community with some neighbors, you have mutual interests. And if you live in the same county with other county citizens, you have mutual interests because your taxes are pooled and used for the benefit of each other. I've heard it said that telling a neighbor he has a problem is like telling your fishing partner that there's a hole in her side of the boat. You know, we're kind of in the same boat. I've been a county commissioner now for about 4.5 years. Prior to that, I spent my working life in the private sector, ran my own business for 22 of those years, and know that this is a tough place to make a living. Some of us are blessed to have been able to make a living here and make a life. And it's a pretty rich lifestyle living in this spectacular county. I got involved in the first growth policy when I was a member of one of the working groups back in the growth policy that came out in 2008. I guess that led into my involvement with the planning board, where I served for 9 years and did some of the legwork that led to the growth policy that I then helped adopt in 2017. And in there, goal 15 of that currently active document is protect private property rights. Goal 16 is to be a little more proactive with land use decisions. Things don't just have to happen to us. We can actually try to shape our destiny. Goal 17, I believe, is to try to help Park County diversify its economy. And those are worthy goals. This is a spectacular place to live, but a challenging place to live. And there's a lot of change going on. You know, change is hard. Uncertainty is really difficult. And we've all been through various events that I think Michelle mentioned, where development proposals have come up, and then the neighbors have come out and expressed their opposition to those. I think it would be great if through the growth policy and conflict mitigation, we could actually come to a better understanding of what the guidelines were, so that we weren't blindsiding each other and we could shape the future of our beloved county. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Just mentioning private property rights, I think is so important. And really, this process, believe it or not, is set up to protect private property rights. Zoning really is set up to protect private property rights. It also is set up to basically ensure all the things that we care about a particular area. If you look at this beautiful photo here of the Paradise Valley, it's set up to preserve fish and wildlife habitat, prevent soil erosion, ensure water quality and quantity issues. It's set up to protect ag lands. And so a whole variety of things, but protecting property rights is kind of foundational. And the permitting process, real quick, before I kick it to John, is not set up to say no to a particular proposal. Rather, it's set up to say, yeah, you can do this, but we're going to establish a couple of parameters around your use and how it's used. So it's putting a couple of sideboards, whether it's protecting, stuff like soil erosion or some dust mitigation. And so we can help answer some of those questions as we go on. So John, I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak.
Did we lose John?
Yeah, I've been in the county for about 25 years as a guest and 10 years as a resident. And as Bill said, at the beginning of my being out here was a time when we were starting to look at the issue of a new planning document and growth document for the county, which I found to be very intriguing. I applied for the volunteer board and was accepted, and I've been on the board for about 5 years. I became the chair accidentally when the previous chair, Peter Fox, moved out of the county, and I happened to be the next man up. So we've been looking at and taking seriously the issue of proactivity in planning for the county, which has been a bit of a problem, as we know. It's been unique. There's a lot of tradition for people being independent, for taking accountability for themselves. All those really, really great attributes that make this county wonderful. However, we're getting to a point where there's some critical mass going on in terms of issues with growth and development, sprawl, utilization of land, how water is regulated or not, issues with transporting things across the valley, whether it's on on 89 or other parts of the county, 89 north or south. This is not a Paradise Valley initiative that we're about. It's a Park County initiative. There is no zoning in any place in Park County, with the exception of some regulations on billboards and some potential regulations on debris and so forth. But outside of that, there's no zoning whatsoever. There are conversations, of course, on chicken processing plants up in the Shields Valley, or tire dumps, or gold or asphalt plants, or any number of things, up to and including some significantly large potential camping type sites in the Bailey Lake area, or other things going on with growth and development. So the 7 members, all volunteers of the planning board, took up the expectation of being more proactive. A lot of people had talked to us about the big 5 or 6, the trash dumps, the Bill Mosier's place, the asphalt plants, as I said, and gold mining, which might have some extraordinarily negative impact on other of our treasures, like Chico Hot Springs and so forth like that. So we operated from the perspective of saying, look, we've got a proud past and a promising future, but it's important, using Jen's words, that we put some guardrails on what we do. And we started out looking at everything in the middle between residential and ag. So we were looking at that middle space. However, we found that we had to define things more clearly on the residential side and on the ag side, and therein came a fair amount of issues and problems. I'll let Mike say more about how we got to this point. We really wanted to have lots of community input to this whole thing, and we knew it was going to be difficult. We sought out opportunities for communities to meet with us. Inevitably, they were energetic, let's put it that way. And for the most part, people were really civil. I attended 4 meetings, 3 community conversations, and 1 with the County Republican Party group. And by and large, they were pretty civil, with 1 clear exception. You know, and people are afraid. They're afraid that their rights are being taken away. And that's the last intention that we have. Our intention is to provide guardrails so people who have what they have, love what they have, want it to remain such as it is, being open to the issue of growth, can do it in a way that's well-planned, reasonable, appropriate, and meets the needs of most of the people most of the time. It does it in a way that lets our kids and grandkids have access to the place. So I'll let Mike talk a little bit more about the process, and then we can get into the conversations from there. Mike?
Great. Thanks so much, John. Yeah. And Mike, I know you joined us a tad late. And if you want to just give a little bit of background, you could share kind of where we've come so far and correct anything that has been possibly misspoken, or if you want to emphasize anything that's said. I'll kick it to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
There.
Yeah, sorry for joining late. I was having a hard time with the Zoom link. Just a quick clarification from what John said. There are citizen-initiated zoning districts in Park County. Currently, there are, I believe, 6 of them, maybe 5. We lost one that was vacated by the landowner who created it. There is one county-initiated zoning district, but it only regulates signage, and that's along US Highway 89 South, East River Road, and Old Yellowstone Trail. Outside of that, John is correct. There is no zoning from a county perspective on land use in Park County, with the exception of those citizen-initiated zoning districts. And each one of those is different, and they have different regulations, different permitting process, etc. As far as background, you know, we've been talking about conflicting land uses in Park County since I started working here in 2006. At that time, we were updating our growth policy. There was a lot of fear in the community, a lot of anger, a lot of hostility, because the fear was that if we adopted a growth policy, it would result in taking of private property and a lot of adverse effects towards development, agriculture, etc. We were successful in getting that growth policy adopted, and that was through even a vote of the electorate, because there was a petition referendum. And by state law, every 5 years, you have to update your growth policy. So we did that in 2016, and it was a very comprehensive process. A lot of people participated. And a lot of people commented that they wanted Park County to do more to address the conflicting land uses that were cropping up from time to time. And the board at that time took a pretty nuanced approach to addressing that specific goal. They first made sure that the commissioners were okay with them trying to address that goal, and the commissioners gave their full support. They looked at all of the different tools that are available under state law. I think a lot of people get confused as to why we do things in the world of planning, why the process is such, and why we don't try to do other things. Well, we always have to operate under state law. State law gives us the authority to do certain things. It provides us with tools, and we have to follow the process if we aim to implement those tools. So the board worked through a host of issues, looking at a variety of tools at the state level. After considering signs and billboards and going through a very lengthy process that was very civil and included a lot of public feedback, both at the board level and the commission level. They considered decay and litter. They recommended that to the county commissioners. County commissioners did not move that forward because they wanted to address enforcement and the lack thereof at the county level. And after that, the board, this is going back to June and July of 2018, said, when are we going to address the conflicting land uses that we see crop up ever so often? And we get a lot of feedback from people that we need to do something. So the board took that up, and they asked staff to identify what tools could be used to address conflicting land uses. And state statutes, there are very few tools that can address land use, and one of them is zoning. And so we talked about the fact that if you were going to control or mitigate or manage or identify land use in Park County, it would have to be through zoning. It's the only tool available to direct or manage or identify and require certain provisions relative to land use. So that's why we started moving forward with the creating a draft zoning district. In fact, at the time, the board members were very specific that how we know that people don't want zoning, but we also know that people want us to fix a problem. And so they said, why don't we create a draft and see what people think about it? And so we created that draft in November of 2018, almost 3 years ago. And the first year, the board worked through the draft. They looked at the process of how they would consider the draft. They looked at the specifics of that draft. And eventually, after about a year and a half, they landed on a final draft that they all agreed would be what we would try to move forward and gather public feedback throughout the county. So we've been doing that. We did it with in-person meetings to start. When COVID hit, we moved to online meetings. We've had quite a bit of participation, and we received feedback throughout that entire time. The board made one round of modifications to the draft based on comments that they received about residential land use and the definition of residential land use, which is the current draft we have right now. And so they've been working at it. They worked through a process, and in July of this summer, they identified that they wanted to end the process by the end of this year and try to make a recommendation to county commissioners. In an attempt to try to get more public feedback, they hosted some listening sessions and really made a last-ditch effort to try to solicit comments. And it worked. We've received quite a few comments over the past month and a half. Unfortunately, a lot of those comments show that there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and from what I've seen, a lot of misinformation being spread throughout the community. I think some of it is purposeful, and I've seen some of the information. I've talked to individuals who have spread information that is incorrect and they've basically chalked it up to difference of opinion. And so I think our biggest hurdle right now is trying to work through a draft when there's a lot of people in the county right now that believe the draft and what it will do is very different than what it was designed to do and the purpose of why it was brought about. And it puts staff and the board members in a pretty compromising position, because we continue to try to provide factual information and answer questions. And we've gotten to the point now in our process where there are some people that just don't want us to participate. They don't want information from us, and they don't believe or trust the information that the so-called government is going to provide. And so moving forward, it's going to be very difficult for the board and the county commissioner, should they choose to take this up, to address a lot of the misleading and misinformation that's out there. And I can assure you, I won't have time in just this hour to try to cover all of it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Michelle, I think we wanted to leave like half an hour for Q&A, and we're at half an hour. So if we want to go into taking questions from folks.
Yeah, perfect timing. So I would love to encourage folks to write their questions in the chat. That way we can, see them coming in and get to them in turn, or raise your hand if you have a question. That's another way we can call on folks. And I'm feeling quite shocked that we don't have anything in the, oh, here we go. Here's our first question. Thank you, from Des Sweeney. What is the date of the latest draft document? And then maybe, Mike, you can also direct folks where to find that.
So I'm at my house right now. I don't have the draft in front of me, but I know that if you go to our website, parkcounty.org, you can go to the commissioner's homepage, which is when you type in parkcounty.org, one of the first things that'll come up, you'll see a link to the Conflict Mitigation Zoning District. And there you will find the most recent draft. You will find an abstract that describes some of the background information as to why this is being considered. You will see a process that the board has been reviewing and making final decisions on, that specifies kind of how they're considering the proposal. And then you'll see a frequently asked questions document. But I believe the most recent version was probably back in March.
March 18th.
March 18th,
Okay,
Mike.
thank you.
Great. So I can see that's the one that Des has. So that's the most current version. Thanks, Mike. And then I have a question here from Jessie Wilcox. And her question is, I've heard county residents ask why this conflict mitigation isn't a ballot item.
So I can take this one. We have, I don't know if you all know Jeff Wagner. Jeff Wagner is a local resident opposed to the district. He's been participating in our process since the beginning, and he has been trying to convince the board and the county commissioners, along with Marty Malone, our House District Representative, that we should put this to a vote of the citizens. And I'm surprised that they have not been willing to acknowledge, when a county local governing body wants to create a zoning district, they have to follow the process that's outlined in state law. And this is really important. When you are doing anything to implement any regulations, policy, making decisions, whether you're working in a quasi-judicial role or otherwise, you have to follow the process. The process stipulates what you have to do in order to create that district. And in county initiated zoning, within that process, there is no vote at the county level unless the commissioners adopt the district by resolution, and there is a petition referendum, which is also a state law and process. And it has been revised as of this last session with a bill sponsored by John Esp. And that changes the threshold for the number of signatures in the petition, as well as who can vote on the district should the referendum petition be successful. So there could be a vote if there's a petition referendum. And the reason, and when we say this, the response from Jeff Wagner and Marty Malone is, well, yeah, that's what state law says, but you could add a vote in the process if you wanted to. There's nothing that says you can't. And I disagree. And I think our attorney's office would disagree, because what they don't realize is when you're creating something like countywide zoning, there might be people for it and there might be people against it. If you deviate from the process to appease those that are against it, you might get sued by the people that are for it. And district court may say, you didn't follow your process, you added in a vote and you deviated from that process. So state law is very clear what the process is. That's why we have not just simply said, let's put this to a vote.
But it could go to a vote if there are enough signatures requesting that, and then it would be on ballot after the regulation is finished.
Right. Like I said, the petition referendum process is
Right.
specified in state law.
Thank
Sorry.
I think we
No,
might
perfect. Thank you.
to
Okay.
want to give instructions on how to chat, where it is, and how to raise your hand in Zoom.
Okay, well, there's some good questions here. I'll just keep going through them.
Okay.
And then I'll say for folks that are new to Zoom, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat box that you can click on and write in there. And then I don't actually really know how to raise your hand to be, I know there's a button down here, reactions, I think is what you click on to raise your hand. But I'm going to just keep going through the questions in the chat for now. So Jeff Rader has the next question here. So for areas, subdivisions that have current protective covenants, will you exempt these areas from the zoning district like a hole in a donut? Can you explain how you'll handle more restrictive covenants or subdivisions?
So typically under state law, if you adopt a regulation that overlaps with other regulations, the more stringent would apply. Now, there has been, the board and the county commissioners could consider adding language that would specifically exempt other, development in areas that there's already a regulation. And a good example of that would be Cook City, Silvergate, Coulter Pass, which has traditional comprehensive zoning. It's a citizen initiated zoning, but it defines where residential use, commercial use, et cetera, could go. And so if for example, the conflict mitigation went in and somebody proposed a commercial development in Cook City, they would already have to get a zoning compliance permit. They would have to implement it in a commercial designated parcel. And if we required them to go through review under this policy, it would duplicate that effort. And so I could see the potential and even the likelihood that we will need to exempt out those areas that already address what conflict mitigation is proposing to do.
Great. And then I see in the chat, Jonathan dropped the link just for folks. If you need to jump on and pull up the regulation that way, it's right there in the chat. And then I see a question here from Joe Phelps. Seems that the terminology of zoning versus conflict mitigation is an issue. How do we answer that question or the question What's the difference between zoning and conflict mitigation?
Conflict mitigation is just the name of the zoning district. That could be changed, modified. They're one and the same. The board is considering a county-wide zoning district. If the commissioners were to take it up, they would move it under their authority under state law, and they could call it whatever they want, but it's simply a zoning district.
Yeah, this is Bill. It's just an attempt to describe the intent of this draft.
And to add to that real quick, zoning can mean many different things. To say an area is zoned doesn't mean one thing. Like Montana probably has hundreds of different zoning districts and different zoning regulations, and they all 100 could be completely different from one another. So to say zoning is one thing is inaccurate.
Great. Thanks, Jen and Bill, for jumping in there. Mike doesn't need to be in the hot seat the whole time. So if there are folks that can answer these questions, that's great. And then, well, this one is actually specifically for you, Mike, and is from Wendy. She says, could you please talk about one of the most misunderstood aspects of the regulation? And then Jesse kind of piggybacked on that and said that I've heard concerns that families passing property onto their children will be put at risk. Is that an example of misinformation, given that conflict mitigation is not involving residential or ag?
So I would say overall, one of the more generalized misleading aspects of the information that's being put out. A lot of people don't like the vague nature of the district, and they think and they assume and they are spreading that what that means is it's a hidden way for the county to be able to regulate everything. And that because it's vague, it will allow me as czar of the world to identify everything as something that would require a permit. And that if you are trying to put a business, you'll be denied. If you want to sell produce, you'll be denied. If you want to chop wood on your property, you'll be denied. So there's this whole narrative that this is a secret attempt, a conspiracy by the government to produce something so vague that allows complete flexibility on the part of the zoning administrator or the governing body or the board of adjustments to just freely regulate everything. And it couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is, when you administer and enforce zoning, if something is vague and not clearly defined, you cannot regulate to it and you cannot enforce it. And when we came up with the original definition of residential and ag, we tried to make it as all inclusive as we could, because we didn't want, the goal was never to try to regulate any type of residential use or any accessory use to residential use. And if you think about the way property is developed and utilized on a regular basis, most property in Park County would be classified as residential and taxed as residential or agriculture. But we also know that within those uses, there's a host of other things that can happen. People can have home occupations. They can manufacture furniture and sell it at the farmer's market. They could do all sorts of things that doesn't rise to the level of getting a business permit and license through the state of Montana as a commercial or industrial or manufacturing business. And we designed the definition to only require review and permitting for those types of land uses that rose to the level where they were classified and taxed as something other than residential or agriculture. So that's one of the bigger misleading conceptions and perceptions in the community, is that because it's not clearly defined, therefore it will be able to just subjectively include anything we want. And it's actually quite the opposite.
And to just add something there, Mike, you mentioned the word government, and I think so often there is opposition to government generically, instead of recognizing, our country, in our country, we all have the opportunity to be part of government, to be government, to participate in government. And that really carries over to this process, because you have and Mike, maybe you can remind me the name of the board that reviews these. The Board of
Adjustments.
Board of Adjustment, yeah. So that would be a citizen group that everyone who lives in Park County could apply to be part of, similar to the planning board. And you would be part of that citizen group that is making determinations on these permits. And that's very similar to the planning board. And there's one member of the planning board who I've spoken to a number of years ago. He complained about government bureaucrats. And I said, you can be part of government, you can join the planning board. And he did, and recognized that, it's not this dark, massive thing out there. It should be all of us. So sorry, that's all I have to add.
So if I may add into that, Jen and Mike, a person at one of the listening sessions, a meeting, said, well, then what I'm hearing is that if a child has a 4-H project and raises a sheep or a lamb or a calf or whatever, if they sell that, you're not going to let them do that, right? And I said, that is absolutely incorrect and false. That is not what this is about. That person then went off and made a lot of statements to other people that kids were not going to be able to participate in 4-H projects. It's difficult when misinformation gets away on folks.
Thanks. It's a good example of why it's good to be here talking about these things. So appreciate you guys making the time. We're going to keep going through the questions. And this one's from Dawn Lang. How was the term conflict mitigation chosen versus a less inflammatory description such as conforming use?
I'll take an initial shot at that. I remember when I was president of the Community Council in Gardner, I think it was 2012, and a commissioner candidate came to town named Clint Tinsley, and he used the Z word the first time I've heard it in public. The very word zone seems to set some folks off. And so words matter, language matters. And, this is where a little bit of branding and marketing, I guess, is handy, just to try to figure out how to communicate what you're shooting for in a way that isn't inflammatory. And conflict mitigation seemed relatively neutral. It's proven to be maybe less so, but always open to ideas, but more importantly, the content and the concept here.
Thanks, Bill. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that. No, I'll go to the next question from Kate Stewart. Is the limit of 3 dwelling units per tract of record under consideration? I know this has been a contentious topic, wondering if subdivision would enable owners of large tracts to place more dwellings on their property.
So listen, Mike, I can take that. I do think that the definition of residential is going to be further discussed and potentially modified by the board. the biggest, and when it comes to public comment and legitimate comments, and when I say legitimate, I mean comments that are applicable to the discussion, that's probably where we're getting a lot of really substantive, kind of well thought out comments, is the definition of residential. So I think that'll be discussed further by the board and especially by the county commissioners if they ever take this up. As far as your question about subdivision, yes, subdivision would still be permitted. This zoning district regulates land use and it doesn't regulate divisions of land. That's a separate title under state law. And so if somebody subdivided their property, every parcel within the district would be able to have the number of dwelling units that the commission lands on, if that's the case when this goes through. So it wouldn't impact subdivision.
Okay, and I see Becky, thank you. I'm sorry that I missed your hand there. I'll just do Jeff's question and then would love to invite you to unmute and ask your question. So Jeff's, why the question is, you're not spot on that there's mistrust with the government. My question is, when is there going to be a meeting for public comment and interaction? One not by Zoom. And then why do we need the county adding to the layers of protection that our water, air, and land already have? For example, the permitting processes at DEQ, DNRC, and subdivision review.
So I think that's a good question. And my hope as we work through this is that we can eliminate duplication. And in fact, I've preemptively been talking to different attorneys and different planners to potentially put us in a position to modify how this is written so that we don't duplicate review. Nobody likes to go through the permitting process, whether you work for the government or whether you don't. And I think when you really get into it, like I mentioned before, why would we require review for a commercial or industrial use that's already contemplated or requires review under a similar regulation? So I think there's opportunity there. However, the state level of review oftentimes misses some of the local considerations that people would like to see. And so I'm hopeful that as we work through this, we can come up with something that captures the type of local concerns and provides for mitigation of those impacts while not duplicating review and requirement at different levels. And that'll be a challenge. And as far as public meetings,
I can take that one, Mike.
Okay.
So the meeting for September was canceled. It was canceled by me as chair of the board on the advice of the county health department. And I had a conversation with the chair of the county commission also, and with members of the planning board. There was a fairly significant question about the public safety in terms of health. And we certainly are going to look at things in the future on a almost a month by month basis. I would remind who was it that asked the question? I apologize, I don't see who it was, but Jeff, that we were getting more people attending Zoom meetings than we were attending face-to-face meetings. And, I'd love face-to-face, we all do. I think that the listening sessions gave us some pause because no one wore masks. We moved to places where we could be a little bit more distanced. There were some people who had difficulty even when reminded about distancing and so forth, and got within range. So we just have to balance all that. We'll look toward having face-to-face, but we're going to be reasonable and prudent and make certain that people are not subjected to the potential of an unhealthy situation to be able to make their voice heard. And Mike, add anything more to that you care to?
Nope. I mean, I think you said it all.
Great. So then I want to invite, and I apologize that I asked for hand raising and then didn't see Becky's hand. So Becky Moores wants to unmute. She's got experience with permitting and zoning in the county and wants to make a few comments, and perhaps it sounds like you have a question as well, Becky. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'd be happy to, I'm new to this conversation, and I'd be happy to take some of this offline with some of the leaders of this call if it would be helpful. And I am a resident here in Livingston, and as part of my job, I help do impact assessment and natural resources permitting and planning. So I'm very familiar with conditional use permits and zoning across the country. And I think this is great that the county is looking into this. You know, relating back to one of the questions from Jeff about there's, you know, permitting processes at many different levels, MSHA, DEQ, Clean Water Act. It's very possible to have a project that is in compliance with all of those other regulations, but that is unwelcome in the county. And as a resident, I like the idea of having this process so that we can have, as the public can have a say in some of this. Mike, based on what you've been discussing, it sounds like the public is worried that the government is going to be making the decisions and that there won't be, maybe they've missed that the public hearing process is there. I can see where there'd be a lot of misconception. And as a professional, I think it's very nice when this is laid out because it clears up some of the confusion if you do want to propose a land use in a location. And on that front, is the establishment of the zone, would it also establish the requirements and application process for a conditional use permit, or are those separate processes?
So this is Mike. Typically that would be separate. So if let's say this all went through and the commissioners adopted it, one of the things we would have to come up with is an application, and it would require an applicant to provide information. Usually it's what the project is, site layout, just information pertinent to the actual project itself and the property. And in addition, it would require that the applicants go through as part of their application and address the criteria outlined in the district regulations. And so once we develop that, plus we have to come up with a permitting fee. The permitting fee has to be a justification for how long we think it's going to take on an average basis for us to review a permit, how much it's going to cost to send out certified mailings to the adjoining landowners, et cetera, public hearing notifications, that kind of thing. So we would develop the application and then people would just fill it out. Typically, we create what's called the completeness element sufficiency review. So when an application comes in, the first thing we do is we just look to make sure that all of the information is included. Once the information is included, then staff, the subdivision or the zoning administrator would generate a staff report that includes the factual components of the proposal, as well as a thorough look at and analysis of the review criteria. And that would most likely generate a recommendation to the Board of Adjustments, either to approve, conditionally approve, or deny. And then the Board of Adjustments would take that up in a public hearing where the public could come and participate, provide public comment. And they would look at the application materials, the staff report, any public comment, or any other pertinent information to the application and proposal. And then they would make a final decision to either approve, conditionally approve, or deny.
Got it. Okay, so this first step is just getting the zoning district in place.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you for that additional information. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your patience, Becky. I know you had your hand up for a long time and for your question. I just wanted to share, I have a few kind of just direct chats and comments from folks just saying they're really grateful for the respectful conversation and reminding us all that it's very human to fear and to worry about regulation, and that when we can come together and speak with respect to one another, that's the way we do things in Park County. So that was a comment from Leslie Feigl. So thank you for that, Leslie, and a few others saying the same thing. And then I see another question here from Terry. How will the proposed in-person meeting be made public or shared more easily?
Public meetings, whether they're in person or Zoom, they're the recording of those meetings are available to the public through the county website. They are all public in every way.
This is Bill. By statute, a meeting of a quorum of the board has to be announced 48 hours ahead of time on the county website, on the bulletin board in the courthouse. And Mike, you can sort of cover what other avenues you use to spread the word.
So yeah, it kind of depends. So we establish our regular board meeting schedule at the beginning of the year in January, and they identify the day of the month and the time and the location that they're proposing to meet. And we try to establish it pretty far in advance. So if anybody wants to know when and where the board's going to meet on any given month, we have that information available. Now, with COVID, we had to make some modifications along the way. And because we used to meet in different communities throughout the county each month. And with COVID, we had to move those online. And so like John mentioned, right now with the Delta variant and our increased COVID cases, we're kind of taking it on a month by month basis, but we're still meeting. Our regular meetings are the third Thursday of each month. We have an agenda that we create about 10 to 15 days in advance. That goes through an internal review process between staff and the board chair and vice chair. And once it's finalized, we publish that on the county website. The agenda is attached. It's in the packet, the information that's sent to the board. And during meetings, the board will talk about, there's a standing agenda item that identifies if they're going to have, where are they going to meet next? Do we have any special meetings we need to consider, that kind of thing. Outside of that, if we have a public hearing, then we have to notice in the enterprise or a publication, a local publication, and we try to get those in newsletters and different things, depending upon what it is. But we have to meet certain additional requirements if it's an actual public hearing. If it's just a regular board meeting, we follow the same agenda requirements that the state law identifies. And we tend to try to get the word out through informal channels as best we can. But if anybody ever has questions, they can always call us, they can email us, they can contact the commissioners, they can go to our website to find more information.
All right, I think that's a pretty good place for us to wrap. We commit to holding these to an hour. I know everybody has pretty busy schedules. And I think that you kind of got to our last question there too, which was from Mike Bunker. What's the timeline for adopting these regulations? That's what you just walked us through, right? Mike, do you have anything to add on that, John? I see you shaking your head.
The timeline.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
So right now, the board is still in an informal process. They have not made a recommendation to county commissioners. They had identified in July of this summer that they were hoping to make a recommendation to the commissioners by the end of this year. We meet on October 21st at 4:00 via Zoom of this month. And my guess is the board's going to have to take a hard look at the schedule that they're under and really think about whether they can get through all of the public comments and make a recommendation by the end of the year, or how they plan to move this forward. Even after that, if the county commissioners take this up in a formal manner under 201 zoning statutes, we're probably looking at 9 months to a year. That's about the typical time frame in Park County, because we usually bake in a lot of additional public comment opportunities. That would be about how long it would take the county commissioners to go through. So it is not going to be voted on and approved and formalized anytime sooner than probably a year from now at best.
Okay, great. And then I just said, you can go to the county website to get that stuff. We always send it out through our email listserv as well. You can sign up at pcecmt.org for that. And our next community conversation, Jen, you want to we'll share that slide, is on planning will be Wednesday, November 3rd. It's always the first Wednesday, noon to 1. We were really waffling about what we might need to discuss, and we haven't decided. So we are open to your suggestions. Please feel free to write us an email. You can write me at michelle@pcecmt.org if there's something you're burning to talk about. Otherwise, I think we'll just continue to kind of watch what are the hot topics in our community, and look forward to meeting here again with you all. We're incredibly grateful for everybody's time, everybody's patience, and especially the willingness of our county folks to be here to help answer some questions. Thank you so much, John and Mike and Bill, for your hard work. And
Thank
with that,
you.
we'll say,
Yep, thank you.
take care, everyone.